This episode will be looking at some solutions and understanding the importance of natural law and something called the myth of authority. Okay, so I'm now going to look at some solutions, and although this next section may seem a bit off topic, it's something I feel it's so important it needs explanation. There is something very fundamental about the knowledge of objective morality that absolutely plays into this information about hemp and a part of, if not the solution to the current state of our world. As you've come to hear, much of the prohibitive laws surrounding this plant touch on very basic principles about freedom. Firstly, I want to define a word here, and I'm 100% certain all of you have heard this before, but most likely have an uninformed idea of what it actually means. And that word is anarchy. And from the Greek prefix meaning without, or the absence of, and archy coming from the Greek noun archon, meaning ruler or master of another, not any kind of self-mastery. People often believe anarchy means no rules, but what it actually means is no rulers. Voluntarism is probably a better term to use, as it doesn't have the negative connotation that anarchy has, and that just means that all human interaction should be voluntary. Anarchy is the state of existence where there are no masters and no slaves. Therefore, anarchy means the absence of slavery, or in other words, freedom. Although it may be contradictory to many people's understandings, morality is objective. What is right is always right, and what is wrong is always wrong. There is a reason why the English language uses the same words right and wrong, meaning correct or incorrect, and also a moral distinction, right or wrong behaviour. Right is something that is both correct and moral. The basic distinction between a right action and a wrong action is whether that action causes harm to another or their property. If the action doesn't cause harm, then it is your right. Harm can simply be described in 3 words. Do not steal. This could be expanded by saying do not murder, assault, rape, trespass upon, steal from, coerce or deceive others. These are all forms of theft. Murder is the theft of life, assault is the theft of well-being, rape is the theft of free will sexual association, trespass is the theft of safety within one's dwelling, theft is theft of property, property is an extension of the self, coercion is the theft of free will, and deception is the theft of informed decision-making. These actions are the definition of violence. These acts violate the rights of others, hence violence, to violate another's rights. In effect, we own ourselves. The product of our labour, our property, is an extension of ourselves, and no one has the right to take away from you or decide anything for you. There are 2 pillars or principles of anarchism, and they are the non-aggression principle and the self-defense principle. The sacred feminine principle, also called the non-aggression principle, states that you do not engage in violence. In other words, do not immorally initiate non-rightful use of physical power to coerce, constrain or compel the rightful physical behaviour or free will choice of another sentient being. And there's the second pillar, the sacred masculine principle. This principle states sentient beings have the inherent right to use force to defend themselves from violence conducted upon them by another. The researcher and speaker Mark Passio eloquently simplifies this concept into one sentence: do no harm, but take no shit. Treat people as you wish to be treated, and if someone attempts violence, tries to violate any of your rights, you have the right to defend yourself physically if necessary. I think a lot of people know and understand the idea of non-aggression, but unfortunately many people are less understanding of the idea of self-defense, especially in the UK. We have been told, even as children, that when 2 people are fighting on the playground, they are both as bad as one another, or that 2 wrongs don't make a right. The truth is, one person initiated the violence and one person defended their rights. It's very important to understand fundamentally, if we're not prepared to defend our rights, then they will be taken from us. Ultimately, this is why it's so important to understand our rights, or what constitutes a right action, and by extension, what constitutes a wrong action. Now I'm just going to play a video from Mark Passio about the most powerful word.
I was in a local pub, and I was wearing the hoodie that I wore right after I finished my speech last night when I went out for a bit after the conference concluded last night. It is a black hoodie with the Gadsden snake on it. And I was sitting outside of this venue, this music venue, and a guy came up to me outside and started trouble with me just because he didn't like the original American iconography of the rebellion and freedom of this country. One American going up to another American and starting a problem when I was sitting there not speaking to any living soul, minding my own business. Okay? What's your snake about? I said, it's the Gadsden flag snake, Don't Tread on Me. It's one of the first, it was actually the first flag of America. They flew it at the Battle of Bunker Hill. It was created by Christopher Gadsden of South Carolina, one of the militiamen who helped unite the militias in the American Revolution. Oh yeah? I see that with these militia types today, and you guys think you're going to fight against the police and the military? And I was like, well, since you asked, if it has to come to that, I said, I guess that's up to you. Are you in the police and military? I guess that would be up to you guys if you are. You know? And he looked at, I had some other, I guess, he thought I was in the military. He goes, what branch did you serve in? I'm like, I'm in the People's Militia. I didn't serve in any branch of the military. Okay? You know, I'm for just freedom. That's it. And he goes, oh, what are you, one of these anarchists? And I said, actually, I am an anarchist. You know, I don't believe in the authority of the state. So his girlfriend was there and was listening, and I started to explain what anarchy meant etymologically. It comes from the Greek an, which means absent or not present, and the word archon in Greek, which means master or ruler. And when I explained that, his girlfriend suddenly turned very had this logical look on her face, like, wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it means, you know, the absence of ruling anybody, and the absence of ruling means there's no slavery, so you're free. I said, exactly, that's what it means. He got so angry that his girlfriend agreed with me when I explained the etymological meaning of anarchy, that it's like this rage came over his face, and he said to me, if you don't like it here, why don't you move? And I said, well, I'll answer that question. I remained very, very calm. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine was sitting there watching the whole thing, and he knew I asked for no part of this conversation. The guy was clearly intoxicated, actually. And I, you know, repeatedly said, you know, nothing's going to be proven or resolved here. You know, we're sitting outside a pub talking about political issues. Like, you're not going to convince me of anything different. I'm not going to convince you of anything different. I don't even know why you're bothering with this. And his girlfriend was, you know, saying, yeah, he's right. Like, come on, let's go. But he was clearly visibly intoxicated from being inside drinking for a while, and he wanted to continue to pursue it. So he gave me this, you know, typical thing. If you don't like how we run things here, why don't you move? And I said, I will answer that question. I'm not going anywhere because I'm right. That's why I'm not going to move from America. Because I'm standing in truth and righteousness. I am in the right when it comes to moral reality. That's the reason I'm not going anywhere. I know the difference between right and wrong. I don't aggress against other people's rights, and no one should aggress against mine. And I'm living in those principles, and because I'm right about those things, don't expect me to leave. If anything, you should leave. You can call that combative speech. I don't care what you call it. I said, you asked me, don't expect me to sit here like some timid little boy and not answer you. Okay? And then his girlfriend pulled him away. And I immediately thought of this quote from Captain America. Every time somebody says that to me, it goes right back to my childhood reading these comics. You know, and I remember this quote. One of my favorite quotes that he ever spoke in the whole comic book. And here's what it is. It doesn't matter what the press says. It doesn't matter what the politicians or the mobs say. It doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else, the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or the consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree next to the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. And that is the energy of the lost word, which people have to fall in love with and understand at a deep, deep core soul level. The word no is the most powerful word in the universe. When we say no, we reclaim all of our natural rights and we take back our power. And that means you have to be willing to defend those rights, not just philosophically, but physically if required to do so. And that's what our ancestors understood. And that's what too many of us have forgotten.
We have free will by the very act of our existence, and we can choose not to live in accordance with morality if we like. However, you cannot escape the consequences of your actions. This is often known as karma, and objective morality can also be defined under this term, or is often called natural law, not to be confused with the Darwinian concept of law of the jungle or survival of the fittest, but inherent moral law or karmic law that dictates the consequences of action. Natural law is a set of universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable conditions which govern the consequences of behaviours of beings with the capacity for understanding the difference between harmful and non-harmful behaviour. The understanding of natural law is centred upon bringing our own conscience into alignment with objective morality. This means definitively knowing which behaviours are right because they do not initiate harm to other sentient beings, and which behaviours are wrongs because they do initiate harm to other sentient beings. This could also be known as the more scientific term, the law of cause and effect, consequentialism, the law of attraction, karmic/moral law, or what has been known as the golden rule, do unto others as you wish unto yourself, or better described in the negative, do not do to others as you would prefer not to have done unto you. It's worth mentioning that these laws operate in the aggregate, which means collectively it will operate on a personal level, but the consequences we see on the world stage are a direct result of the collective adherence or opposition to natural law. When human beings in the aggregate live in harmony with natural law and are therefore moral, they become and remain free. When human beings in the aggregate live in opposition to natural law and are therefore immoral, they become and remain enslaved. This dynamic is often referred to as the law of freedom. As morality increases, freedom increases, and as morality declines, freedom declines. This is important because it's due to this lack of this basic understanding which ultimately keeps us from seeing the changes in the world we want. The adage, be the change you wish to see, doesn't go amiss here. Ultimately, all we can do is change ourselves and help others to do the same, and in the aggregate, the collection of our individual choices combined, we can change the world, hopefully for the better. Okay. Everyone has the exact same rights. No one has any more or less rights than anyone else. Also, since rights are not created by humanity, and since they are the birthright of humanity, gifted to us by the creator of the universe, no human being or group of human beings is actually capable of granting rights to anyone else, nor is any human being capable of revoking rights from anyone else. It's also worth mentioning that I'm sure the vast majority of people probably have no problem with the definitions of a wrong, what we saw on the seven deadly sins slide earlier. I'm sure that the majority, if not all the people listening to them, agree and live without participating in such actions. However, it isn't just about not harming others, it's also about not condoning harmful actions if taken by anyone else. This is where we come up against government or authority, or more accurately, the myth of authority. It is believed that a wrong can be made into a right when a certain group of people come together and perform certain rituals to make it so. I'm sorry to say, but it can't. If an individual has no right to steal someone else's money or take someone else's life, then no group of people can by extension. Just as it would be impossible to give someone £1 million if you don't have £1 million to give, it is impossible to delegate a right which any individual does not have to someone or some other group. Taxation would be called theft, and war would be called murder if done by any individual. The adage, if taking 100% of someone's labour is called slavery, at what percentage does it cease to be slavery? Or ask yourself these questions honestly. If I don't have the right to steal from you, can I get someone else to steal from you and that be okay or moral? No. If I got 10 people together to come and steal from you, would that be okay? Of course not, no. If I got a load of people, millions even, to collectively agree it was okay for me to come and steal from you, would that be okay? No, absolutely not. It cannot and never will be okay, and certainly not moral, no matter how you try to justify it. A horrible stat for you, but in the 20th century alone, 262 million people were killed by democide, which is killing by one's own government. Just to go through this slide. So on the left here, we've got, in the middle, we've got a horrible atrocity of war. On the left-hand side, we've got some politicians, and then on the right-hand side, we've got the military. It says who is lying and who is telling the truth. So the politicians saying, my actions didn't cause this, and then obviously the army men also saying, my actions didn't cause this. So the painful truth, the order follower always bears more moral culpability than the order giver, because the order follower is the one who actually performed the action, and in taking that action, actually brought the resultant harm into physical manifestation. Order following is the pathway to every form of evil and chaos in our world. It should never be seen as a virtue by anyone who consider themselves a moral human being. Order followers have ultimately been personally responsible and morally culpable for every form of slavery and every single totalitarian regime that has ever existed upon the face of the earth. So not only am I saying that our resource problem isn't really a problem and it's used to deceive and control us, I'm also saying that the ones doing the controlling through government are fundamentally immoral by definition. Its enforcers, military or police, are just order followers without the ability of discernment for themselves, and again, by definition, are immoral. No order follower can be moral by the definition of the fact that they don't use their own judgment. They take action based on what they are told to do. This is not choosing right action in the face of a situation, it is blindly following authority, even when in complete contradiction to morality. Okay, so this is just a slide here with statism on one side and anarchy on the other. Statism, obviously the erroneous idea that somehow the state makes us a better place. That it's a necessity for society. So I'll just read this here. Statism is the brilliant idea that we give a small group of people the right to kidnap, imprison, harass, steal from, and kill people so that we can be protected from people who kidnap, harass, steal, and kill people. I'm sorry about this. I know that this understanding can be pretty hard to hear. However, if freedom means anything, it means the right to say things which people don't want to hear. That was George Orwell that said that, of all people. So as much as I'm clearly an advocate for hemp and the resource freedom this would provide for humanity, and I believe it is essential to understand about these kinds of solutions along with a whole host of other solutions that already exist and for the most part aren't really talked about within the mainstream, I believe that this understanding, the understanding of natural law, moral objectivity, and the myth of authority are the foundational understandings that will bring about true freedom in our world. If we are conscious and take the knowledge of natural law and we accept it, we make it understanding and live in accordance with that knowledge and understanding through our actions, the true definition of wisdom, we generate sovereignty within ourselves and freedom externally, or order. If we don't have the knowledge, or we stay unconscious, or choose not to accept that knowledge to ignorance, effectively to ignore it, to ignorance, we generate confusion within ourselves and slavery/control externally, or chaos. It's only through the former, this process of living in accordance with natural law in the aggregate, and by a large enough percentage of humanity, that will ultimately bring about the kind of true freedom many of us desire. If you're interested in these topics and a whole lot more, please visit whatonearthishappening.com. This is a site by the researcher and whistleblower Mike Passio. He's one of the people I dedicated this presentation to. His work is referred to as the one great work, as these understandings, particularly natural law, is the occulted or hidden knowledge that will ultimately set us free and has been the basis for all mystery school and secret societies throughout antiquity. The previous slides in this presentation are taken from Mark's work. I highly recommend his natural law presentation or listening to his podcast starting from the beginning, episode 1, if you're ready for a deep dive. To give Mark's definition of the one great work, quote, "The true great work is to help people abandon the false and dogmatic beliefs which have been holding back the progress of consciousness and impeding the reception of truth and natural law. The true great work is the arduous task of influencing others to realize that in supporting and condoning the legitimacy of authority, that they have actually been supporting and condoning the legitimacy of slavery, and that they were immoral for having done so," end quote. So, and now that I've mentioned what I call the solution, I will go over some other practical solutions. So one of the best and also simplest solutions to facing this current situation, although it may seem fairly insignificant, is to disseminate the information. People cannot begin to understand the true nature of the world we live in if the facts aren't readily available to them. The first step is to educate oneself and then others. Start conversations with people, print off leaflets, hand out documentaries, recommend books. There's a good chance some of this effort will seem wasted and it may fall on deaf ears, but just like the rule of 7, sometimes it takes people hearing the same information multiple times from multiple people before they begin to reevaluate their worldview. It's also worth mentioning that we don't need to convert everyone, just enough people to tip the balance, and the floodgates will open and the truth will set us all free. Another fairly obvious solution is for people to start growing, buying, and using hemp products in their everyday lives, as well as supporting the businesses, organisations, and farmers that sell, support, and grow hemp. This is truly the only way that hemp can begin to repair our environment. The more demand there is for hemp, the more it will have to be grown, and in turn, the cheaper the products will become. More land use for hemp means that more CO2 will be sequestered, that soil quality will improve, that less agricultural chemicals can be used, less trees would have to be cut down, and oil drilling and fracking and other destructive practices with its associated pollution can be made obsolete. It is down to the everyday habits of everyday people, voting with their actions, what they choose to buy, who they choose to support, what they consume physically and mentally, that will ultimately change the world. See, it's not just about how we spend our money, although that certainly helps, but how we choose to spend our time. I hope that throughout this talk you can begin to understand how useful the cannabis plant has been throughout history, and begin to see the concerted efforts of the powers that most definitely shouldn't be to control this miracle plant, monopolise on its prohibition, while simultaneously using it as a method to control people and ultimately a means to destroy human freedom. The same fascist politicians and bureaucrats that said, quote, casual drug users should be taken out and shot, or quote, I have no problem with beheading marijuana users, or quote, marijuana punishment should include severing of hands, arms, feet and legs, and quote, this marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relation with Negros, or quote, reefer makes darkies think they are as good as white man, and quote, you smoke a joint and you're likely to kill your brother, have little care for truth. Their very livelihoods depend on people not realising the truth that this very plant, cannabis hemp, marijuana, the same plant that throughout all of human history hasn't caused one recorded death, effectively has the ability to reverse or solve many of the problems the world and humanity is facing today. The question that I then have to ask is, what do you intend to do about it? In this instalment, we have learnt what natural law is and how to live in accordance with it to help manifest freedom for humanity. We have learnt that this can only be done by dispelling the myth of authority, and that it's down to the choices and behaviours of everyday people like ourselves to create the change we wish to see. The next episode will continue with some solutions and is titled, What Can I Do About It?